Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another WTF Wednesday. So this video today is going to be on the unsolved murder of Lindsay Buziak. It's a case that I continue to follow up on still to this day, and it is just so intriguing to me and crazy and very heartbreaking. Let's get right into the case. Lindsay was born and raised in Victoria, Canada, and she was a huge people person. She loved being around her friends and family, and also, if you can see by her photos, she is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. She was so beautiful and, like I said, just very outgoing, the life of the party, and just looking at her, she looks like someone you want to hang out with, someone you want to be friends with. She was so kind. Everybody who knows her, I mean, it's actually kind of something we'll get into later in the case, is finding a motive, because Lindsay truly was just an amazing person to be around. All of that being said, Lindsay chose to pursue a career in real estate, which I think is absolutely perfect for Lindsay. Like I said, she was such a huge people person, so you know, being a real estate agent is honestly such a perfect job for her. Real estate was something that Lindsay was very passionate about, and also something that she kind of grew up around. So her father was also a real estate agent, and so kind of following in his footsteps was also something that Lindsay was very excited to do. Her and her father had such a close relationship. They were best friends. His dad loved her so freaking much, and they had an awesome relationship together. Lindsay was dating her pretty long-term boyfriend at the time. His name was Jason, and he also was a mortgage broker and also had a real estate license. As well as Jason's mom was the manager at the RE/MAX office that Lindsay worked at. So all of those closest to her were all in this industry, so it was very, very close to Lindsay. In January of 2008, Lindsay got a pretty interesting phone call. This call was from a woman who wanted to make an appointment with Lindsay to see some homes. Now, this sounds pretty standard, pretty day-to-day business for Lindsay. However, this call was a little bit interesting. So this woman not only wanted to make an appointment with Lindsay, she was also looking for a home very, very quickly. This woman said her and her husband were making the move from Vancouver to Victoria for a job relocation. And so with that being said, they needed something move-in ready, and they needed something in the next like 72 hours, which is crazy. This woman also wanted a pretty large home. They were looking for 3-bedroom, 3-bath, as well as like living quarters for a live-in maid. So this was a pretty wealthy couple looking for a fairly large house in like the nick of time. And I forgot to mention to you guys, Lindsay is 24 at the time, so she's still, you know, fairly new to her career, and getting, you know, calls like this is a huge opportunity for Lindsay. So at first, this call was super exciting to Lindsay. She was like, oh my gosh, like this is great. They're gonna be purchasing $1 million home and they need it ASAP. Like, sounds good. However, she kind of had this weird gut feeling about this woman who called, and there were a couple reasons why. So first off, the woman had a thick accent that Lindsay couldn't quite make out. She said that it sounded maybe like a Spanish accent, but not really. She also said that the accent was just bizarre in such a way that she thought the woman was faking it to disguise her voice. Now, this is something Lindsay actually talked to her dad and her boyfriend about at the time. Another strange thing to note is Lindsay doesn't normally get cold calls like this. I mean, this is opportunity sounds a little bit too good to be true, honestly. So Lindsay asked the woman on the phone, like, oh, how did you hear about me? The woman mentioned that she was referred by a previous client of Lindsay's. And so Lindsay was like, okay, sounds good. And they made an appointment to meet that Saturday to look at one specific home in particular. Now, like I said, Lindsay just didn't have a super great feeling about this phone call. The whole scenario to her just seemed off. And I think we've all had you know, experiences like that or times like that when something happens and you're super stoked about it, but then you kind of take a step back and look at the situation and you're like, this is a little bit strange. Lindsay talked to her boyfriend Jason and her father about this kind of woman, and she said, I don't want to miss out on this opportunity. I really want to do the house showing. I just feel a little bit off. Would you maybe come with me? Would you maybe kind of wait outside during the house showing? You know, and that just tells you that Lindsay really did have a very strange feeling about this woman. I also wanted to mention that Lindsay called the couple who this woman said referred them to Lindsay, and they didn't answer. She called them a couple of different times, and it sounded like they were maybe out of town. So she couldn't really talk to them or verify how they knew her. Lindsay found a home in Saanich in this beautiful neighborhood, and she found the perfect home that she thought would fit kind of everything, all of the description that this woman wanted, and they decided to meet at 5:30 p.m. that Saturday. So Saturday comes and Jason and Lindsay are together and they decide to grab some dinner before Lindsay's house showing. Now, they did drive separate, and Jason after dinner said, great, like you head over to the home, I have to run a quick errand and I will be there between like 5:30 and 5:45. Lindsay says, sounds good, great, and she is off to the home. So Jason went to run his errand, and it involved picking up a friend of his. They were planning on playing hockey later that night. So he went to pick up his friend and texted Lindsay to let her know, hey, I'm just leaving. I should be there in a few minutes. And that was around 5:31 p.m. She texted right back and said, sounds great. Now, at 5:38, Jason texted Lindsay again and said, hey, I'm a couple minutes away. Is everything good? Are you okay? However, Lindsay did not respond to this text, and in fact, she didn't even open the text at all. At this point, however, Jason knows, you know, the house showing had started a couple minutes ago. I don't think he was necessarily expecting Lindsay to text back. He was just kind of keeping her updated. At 5:45, Jason and his friend arrive at the home and they pull into the driveway. And right when they pull into the driveway, Jason and his friend see a man exiting the home through the front door, and they didn't really get a good look at this man because he was kind of opening the door and then he went back into the house and shut the door. So this wasn't like alarming to Jason and his friend. They more were like, oh shit, like they're coming out, or they must be finished already or something, you know. They didn't think anything of it. And Jason was like, I'm gonna pull around the corner. I don't want them to think someone else is here. I don't want them to know that, you know, I'm Lindsay's boyfriend. Like, he kind of was just thinking that he would look like the meddling boyfriend and it would not be very professional looking for Lindsay. Well, it's been about 10 minutes and Jason decides to text Lindsay again, this time at 5:55. He texted Lindsay to ask if they were wrapping up, if she needed anything, and again, Lindsay did not open the message or respond, obviously. At this point, Jason is starting to get a little worried. This is the second text he sent now that Lindsay hadn't even opened. It's been pretty much 30 minutes since the house showing started, and if any of you guys have ever gone to a house showing or looking at homes, 30 minutes is like quite a long time to look at a house. You're usually in and out in 15 to 20 minutes. So obviously I've never gone to look at $1 million houses before, so maybe there's a lot more to look at. At this point, Jason actually just makes a phone call to the Saanich police and kind of lets them know the situation. Now it is 6:05 and Jason hasn't heard from anybody. He hasn't seen anybody leave the house. Remember, he's right across the street. He hasn't seen anyone through the window. He hasn't heard anything. It's radio silence at this point. So Jason's gut is telling him to go check on Lindsay, and he's like, screw this. I don't care if I look like a crazy boyfriend. I'm gonna go check. Jason walks to the front door with his friend and knocks. No answer. He then rings the doorbell and waits. No answer. At this point, Jason is like, something's happening. I'm going in. He goes to open the front door and it is locked. At this point, everybody knows there's something going on. So him and his buddy are kind of looking into windows, trying to see if there's a way inside the house, and it looks like the back door in the backyard was left open. So Jason helps his friend hop the fence. His friend goes into the back door of the house and unlocks the front door for Jason. Jason barges into the house, is looking everywhere for Lindsay, yelling her name, searching every single room, and this is when Jason goes into the master bedroom and finds Lindsay on the floor, and there is blood everywhere. Jason then makes another 911 call and says, get an ambulance here. You know, he's super panicked, freaking out, and he begins to start doing CPR on Lindsay. And I mean, it was obvious to him that she was gone. Lindsay was stabbed 40 times in the face, neck, and chest. What history has kind of taught us in these type of situations is that 9 out of 10 times, well, I don't know, that's not a real statistic, that's my made up statistic. When somebody is brutally stabbed in the face, especially, and then possibly up to 40 times, that is massive overkill. That is something that is extremely personal. That is a rage, crime of passion, personal attack. There were also no defensive wounds on Lindsay's body, so it's pretty apparent to investigators at this time that she had walked into this room and they had surprise attacked her from behind and that she had died fairly soon. At this point, there is zero evidence in this house besides Lindsay's body. There was not a fingerprint left. There was not a weapon left. There was absolutely no signs that anybody else had even been in the home with Lindsay. There was nothing, not a single hair follicle left behind. The police literally had absolutely nothing to go off of. So police are gonna start where they always start, with people closest to Lindsay. So they start interviewing her friends, her family, and of course, Jason, right? And so of course he's kind of, you know, gonna be a point of interest in this investigation. Now, Jason was cleared pretty quickly because of, first of all, the lack of evidence. Second of all, his alibi. He was with this buddy of his parked outside the house the entire time the murder had taken place. Also, Jason was extremely compliant with the police. He took a polygraph test. He did so many walkthroughs with them. He was there at their every beck and call no matter what they needed, and he was extremely compliant. I think one of the reasons Jason was looked into as a suspect was was the boyfriend, after all. There's also some stuff I'm gonna get into coming up here in a minute. Also was not very grief-stricken. Now, I get that this is absolutely something that the police need to look at every time. You know, how somebody's acting, the psychology behind it. I get that that is something that is very, very important to a case. If you have ever gone through grieving over anybody, you know how personal it is and how different it is for every single individual who's going through it. So Jason was very unemotional. He was very serious. He was never crying. He never really looked that hurt over what had happened. And I think that was a very huge red flag to people. You know, this was the love of his life. Like, Jason absolutely loved Lindsay. They loved each other. And, you know, how could this boyfriend who he literally found her body? I mean, I could not even imagine walking into that and seeing the person you love stabbed over 40 times in the face and neck. Like, I just think this whole thing was extremely traumatizing for him. And I think that, you know, is a big reason of kind of how he acted. 6 weeks before Lindsay's death, Lindsay made a trip to Calgary, Alberta to see her father. This is where he lived. Now remember, Lindsay and her dad were extremely close. During this time, Lindsay had a conversation with her father about Jason. She kind of just had a talk with him and said, I don't know if I want to be with him for the rest of my life. He's pretty jealous. He's a little bit overprotective at times. Basically, it kind of sounded like Lindsay was kind of saying that Jason was maybe a stage 5 clinger. She wanted her space. She kind of just felt like he was always there, like constantly. And we kind of see a little bit of that, you know, with how he was very quick to be right outside the house, to text Lindsay, you know, multiple times as she was in the showing. Lindsay basically said, you know, I'm seriously considering calling it off with him, and kind of just wanted to talk to her dad about it. When this kind of information came out, it didn't really help Jason's case, right? He was already kind of a person of interest, and now the fact that Lindsay was thinking about breaking up with him and saying he was controlling and overprotective and jealous, like that just fueled the fire. The reason I'm mentioning this is just because if you do decide to look into this case, there are so many people, and honestly, including Lindsay's dad at the time, thought that Jason had something to do with it. Like 100% thought that he was involved somehow. At this time, investigators are starting to look into other scenarios, other situations, and this is when, in my opinion, one of the biggest pieces of evidence kind of arises, and that is the phone. Investigators then traced the phone that had called Lindsay. So this woman who called Lindsay, right? Of course, if anyone's surprised, they come to find out that this phone was a burner phone. So this burner phone was registered to a fake name, a fake address, and it was purchased in November of 2017, so just a couple months before Lindsay's murder, at a convenience store. Something interesting to know about this phone is that the only number this phone ever called was Lindsay. So the phone was purchased in November, it was used to call Lindsay in January, and the day of the murder, the phone was deactivated and disposed of. There are no questions that this phone was purchased for this crime. The investigators are starting to look at this murder as a hit situation. So while at first this crime looked like a huge crime of passion, something very personal, a very personal attack on Lindsay, now it's looking like a very strategic, professional, planned, and organized crime. Nothing to go off of, you guys. Like, there's still no motive. There's still no real evidence besides the phone. There's no witnesses. There's nothing. The next break in the case is an eyewitness who lived in the neighborhood who came forward and said, you know, I saw these two individuals. This person saw the man and the woman walking up the street towards the house and introducing themselves to Lindsay. The person did not get a very good look at either one of the man or the woman. However, they did say that both were Caucasian, and the man had to at least been like 6'2", 6'3". He was very tall. Something very interesting is that this woman that they saw had a blonde, like short shoulder length bob, and that she was in a very like distinctive dress. So the dress she was wearing was white, black, and hot pink, and had a very distinctive pattern on it. It said that the demeanor of these two individuals was not out of the ordinary, and they had looked pretty normal. This witness did see the couple enter the house, however, nobody saw them leave. And before we kind of get into motive at this point, I just want to make a couple points that I read on during my research, and also that I also believe. I'm a firm believer that this was a hit on Lindsay. Of everything I've listened to, watched, and read on, that is what I believe. And I think that this couple was extremely professional and strategic in every little thing that they did, even down to this woman's dress. She had on a very distinctive patterned dress. I think that this was worn as a distraction. You know, even the witness who saw it didn't really get a good look at the woman's face because she just noticed this super patterned dress she was wearing. I think absolutely every little thing this couple did, they did for a reason. They brought a canine unit into the home to see if they could somehow track this couple's whereabouts, to see where they went. However, this led to nothing. The second the sniffer dogs got out the door, they had no sign of where this couple went. The trail was completely lost. Based on Lindsay's phone records and just kind of the whole timeline of the situation, Police believe that the attack happened at 5:41 p.m., between 5:41 and 5:45. This also leads me to believe that this was a professional situation, because this couple, you guys, came into the house, murdered Lindsay between 5:41 and 5:45, and peaced out. Jason was literally in the driveway, you guys. He was in the driveway for a minute, and he was also right across the street on the side of the road in this beautiful, like, rich-ass neighborhood. No one saw them leave. No one heard, like, Lindsay screaming. No one heard anything. They were, like, freaking stealthy, crazy robots, in my opinion. The fact that they were able to carry out such a gruesome and disgusting crime in 3 minutes with no evidence, no witnesses hearing or seeing anything besides the one who saw them walking up, is crazy to me. If you guys remember, right when Jason pulled up at 5:45, he did see, like, the man look like he was exiting the house, and they went back in. It's my assumption that the couple was leaving the home. Like, they had murdered Lindsay and they were leaving, and they came out, saw Jason, and that's when they left out the back door. The biggest unknowns is still who would have hired them and why Lindsay. This is still the biggest question in this whole case that is unknown, is motive. And you guys, motive is like the most crucial aspect of a crime, is the motive. Without a motive, you literally have little to nothing to go off of. So here's where we get into, in my opinion, the strongest theory, and also the theory that I personally believe to be true. This theory and this whole situation, you guys, is straight up out of a freaking movie, so hold on. So if you remember earlier, we touched on Lindsay going to Calgary to see her dad 6 weeks before her death. On this same kind of weekend trip, Lindsay had tried to contact a friend from high school. She contacted him via a phone call and Facebook Messenger. Nobody knows why Lindsay reached out to him. A lot of her friends were interviewed, you know, and said, hey, like, was Lindsay actively hanging out with this guy? Was he invited to your parties? Was he a mutual friend? And he wasn't. So it seemed like Lindsay had out of the blue contacted this old friend from high school. I don't know if the police know or if it just hasn't been released, but to the public it is unknown if Lindsay ended up making contact with him or not. Now, it just so happened that this individual that Lindsay contacted was a mid-level dealer with a massive drug cartel in Canada. There's no evidence that Lindsay was a drug user. None of her friends did drugs. None of them, you know, partied. Yeah, like they'd go, you know, clubbing and hanging out and get drunk on the weekends, but there were zero signs or evidence that Lindsay, you know, dabbled in drugs at all with anybody. Did Lindsay know that this man that she had tried to talk to was involved in drugs? Did she know he was a drug dealer? We don't know. Was she just contacting him because maybe she had a crush on him back in high school and, you know, she just got done saying, like, I kind of want to leave Jason. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she wanted to meet up. I don't know. Literally nobody knows why she contacted him. Here's where things get even weirder. During Lindsay's trip to Calgary, police were launching this huge investigation into the drug trafficking that was going on there, specifically cocaine. In late January 2008, police seized a bunch of cash as well as 67 kilos of cocaine that had the street value of well over $2 million. And again, this happened at the end of January. And there were dozens of people who were arrested in this bust, including the guy that Lindsay had reached out to when she was in Calgary. Now, remember, this is the same timing that Lindsay was murdered. An officer came out and kind of spoke about how people lost a lot of money during this high noon drug bust. Those people knew that someone had talked. They knew somebody had said something. Someone tipped off the police. They said this is kind of known as one of the biggest drug busts in Canadian history. Like, this was a massive cartel, you guys. These were extremely powerful people. We know that Lindsay was not involved in the High Noon investigation. She was not working with the police. She was not like undercover. She was not working as an informant. The contact she made to this individual could have had absolutely nothing to do with drugs at all. So was it simply a coincidence? It said that Lindsay was either mistakenly identified as the person who could have leaked information to the police, or even worse, she was just collateral damage from being tied to the situation from the cartel's perspective. Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but something that I think happened is that this huge drug bust happened, and the cartel used Lindsay as like an example, right? I think that the cartel hired a hit. I think they looked into anybody who had been contacting anybody at the time, and Lindsay's name came up. I only have the record that she had called and Facebook messaged this drug dealer, but could she have been talking to him prior? Could they have maybe been looking at each other romantically? Could she have had no idea about what he was doing? Those are kind of all the unknown questions. However, Lindsay was extremely unlucky in this situation. I think the fact that she had kind of contacted them 6 weeks prior, and then this drug bust happens, I think the cartel hired a hit on Lindsay and hired a gruesome hit on Lindsay to use her as an example to say, here's what happens when you fuck with us. This is why I'm saying it's something straight out of a movie. I don't know if any of y'all watch Ozark, but the freaking drug cartels don't fuck around, you guys. Like, they don't. In my opinion, I think this is very likely what happened. This was a very strategic, planned out attack. Hiring a hit couple is not easy. It's not cheap. I think somebody had to have been involved in extremely illegal activity to be able to even hire these people. There's no question in my mind that these were hired individuals. There's just not. And like I said, do I think Lindsay had anything to do with this drug cartel? No. I think she was very unlucky, was speaking possibly to this guy, and maybe she knew about his background, maybe she didn't. That's why there's no evidence. I think that's why there's really no motive. I think that's why it looks like this crime was taken out by a hitman, because I think it was. To me, everything points to something like this scenario happening to Lindsay. While Saanich police say that there is some truth behind this whole drug bust situation, they won't go as far to talk about what those things are. Anybody, any person of interest, any leads, they're not talking about it. One little crazy bit scenario that I want to throw in here really quickly at the end, 2017, there was a possible lead or break in this investigation where it was some kind of blog about Lindsay's murder, and somebody had commented on it and said like this extremely taunting, disturbing text, and I'll link it down below so you guys can read it. But this person basically said like, I killed Lindsay. All these cops are stupid. They're dumbasses. You guys will never catch me. It's been years and like I'm still free. I'm still doing my thing. So this did get investigated. However, it led to nothing. Like there was absolutely, it was a straight up dead end, this comment. Nobody could find anything tied to this person at all. I think people are just stupid, and I think someone just did that to be a dick. So in closing, I wanted to mention Lindsay's father because he just reminds me so much of, you know, my stepdad and my dad. He is an absolute hero. I'm not kidding you guys. There is not a single day that goes by in this man's life that he is not working his ass off to get justice for Lindsay. He has gone to so many news outlets, so many blogs. He's been on Dr. Phil. He's done Dateline interviews. He's done so many interviews. You can just see it in his face, you guys. He is absolutely so hurt and heartbroken about Lindsay to this day, and he will never stop looking for answers. He just won't. He never will. He was so close with her, and it's just so sad and heartbreaking at how little answers there are in this case, and the answers we do have point to Lindsay being at the wrong place at the wrong time, which is so sad. And the fact that Lindsay had this kind of like gut feeling about showing this house, she knew of her mind that something possibly bad is going to happen, and it did. And it is just so horrible to think about. And also, you know, from Jason's perspective, or even from Lindsay's perspective, getting murdered when you know your boyfriend is 2 yards away on the street waiting for you, when maybe she could feel her phone buzzing. She knew Jason was texting her. She knew he was out there to keep her safe. Like it just makes me sick to my stomach to think about that. And I think until somebody says something, Lindsay's case is never going to be solved. And unfortunately, I think she was used as an example of don't say anything or this will be you. All right, you guys, that is it for this case. There is actually a lot of media around this case, and I kind of like to try to do, it's not that I like try, but I kind of would rather focus on cases that maybe aren't well known and didn't get a lot of media coverage, so that I can kind of spread the word about those cases. However, this case does have so many places that you can go and research and watch, and I encourage you to do so and let me know what you think happened to her. Thank you guys so much for all of your love and support. By the way, I think I'm gonna do some sort of a giveaway when I get to 100 subscribers, so please keep spreading the word and hitting that subscribe button if you haven't. And yeah, that is it. Thanks so much, you guys. Bye.